Welcome, everyone, to this funeral service for Stephen J. Cohen. We begin with the chanting of the 121st Psalm.
Esaina el harim me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai Ose shamayim Shamayim Ba'aretz Al yiten lamod raglecha Al yanu Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha al yad yaminecha, Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka, ve'yareach balayla. Adonai yishmorcha mikol ra, yishmor et nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzedcha uvoecha me'ata ve'ad olam. Psalm 121. I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way, and your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your guardian, your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. And Adonai will guard your soul, your going and coming, now and forever.
Death has taken our beloved Stephen Cohen. And our friends grieve in their darkened world, and our community grieves for all that Steve gave to this community for so many years, holding our hands and walking with us as we walked through the valley of the shadow. In the tears that have been shed, there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, and be with them. For Steve's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever, for his companionship and compassion that we shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory, for the gifts of his heart, his mind, his caring and concern that brought joy and happiness and comfort. And now, as a precious remembrance for all these and more, we give our thanks to God. And in this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred Scripture that brings us the ever new message of God's nearness. A voice that tells us of our kinship with the Creator in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. In the 15th Psalm, we find the following: Adonai miyagur bo halecha miyishkon bahar kodshecha. God, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain, those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless but honor those who revere God, who give their word and come what may do not retract, who do not exploit others, who never take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. And perhaps more than any other of the Psalms, the 23rd Psalm has brought so much comfort to so many over the years as they go on the journey of walking through the valley. I want to invite Cantor Sachs back up to chant the 23rd Psalm. And then you have the text in front of you. Please join her in the English.
Adonai roi lo echsar bino deshe yarbitzeini al mei menuchot Yenaleni Nafshi Yeshovev Yancheni v'maglei tzedek Yancheni v'maglei tzedek Lemon Shemo Gam ki eilech begit salmavet Lo irara ki ata imadi Shiftecha umishantecha Hema yenachamuni Aroch lefanai Shulchan neged tzorarai Dishanta v'Hashem en roshi Kosi revaya Ach tov v'chesed Yudefuni Kol yemei chayai Kol yemei chayai V'shavti bevein Adonai leyorech yamim Adonai roi lo echsar Adonai roi lo Before we read the translation together, just a short tribute on behalf of all of the Rocky Mountain rabbis and cantors, so many of us who are here today. In this psalm, we talk about a pastoral place, a place of peace that we hope the soul of our loved one has gone to. We want for them a place without pain, a place that feels comfortable and familiar. And we know that it can be hard to imagine that for someone who has passed away. But Jim, I hope you know that you, in your Father's legacy, help us do that so many times, over and over and over again. And it is with the peace that clearly comes from a long legacy of what it means to love the Jewish people and help them feel loved in return that we do our best and help those who are in mourning feel that their loved ones are in a better place. And so with that in our hearts and our minds, we're going to read our translation together of Psalm 23. God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever.
In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach. God has given, and God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. An ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief and the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us. And yet the centuries have taught us that the Keter Shem Tov, the crown of a good name, endures beyond the grave, and that there is strength in faith. And so with Job we say, Adonai Natan, God, you have given. You gave us Stephen Cohen, who not only will not be forgotten, but whose caring and love has helped so many hundreds and hundreds of families walk the path that this beautiful family is now walking. And for all that was good and enduring in his life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. V'Adonai lakach, and God, you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and love, as we now say, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach me'ata v'yad olam. Blessed be the name of God, now and forever. And finally, the words of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3. L'kol zman va'et l'kol chefetz tachat hashamayim. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down, a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time for tearing and a time for sowing, a time for silence and a time for speaking. And my friends, now is both a time for silence and for speaking. Silence as we take a few moments to remember Steve Cohen and the gifts that he gave to his family, his lifelong friends, to this community. And we savor them and we hold on to them. And now is a time for speaking, a time for remembering and celebrating and paying tribute to a life well lived. And so we take a few moments now of silent prayer.
Imre fi, beg only be, lefanecha, Adonai, tzuri. Uri begoali, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, Adonai, my rock and my redeemer.
At this time, I want to call up all the grandkids to say some words. Shane and Eva will be speaking for their fellow grandkids. Right in the mic.
We FaceTime fairly often. He would ask how I was doing. I'd reply, I'm doing all right. And he'd then say, well, you look good. And I'd say, right back at you, which always made him chuckle a little bit. But I was never really lying to him. He was actually way more stylish than I ever gave him credit for. His signature Paco Rabanne cologne that you'd drown in every time that you tried to hug him. The itchy sweaters that came in and out of style twice since he started wearing them. I have one. They're in right now. I have two in my closet. And the Cohen boys certainly have some pretty cool jewelry to fight over. But as modest as he was the definition of suave. We'd go on to talk about whatever I was up to, sports, nonsense. And the last time we had talked, he said, well, I don't understand you, but I love you. I'm often told he had a special attachment to me, and I like to believe that's true, but I also know that I wasn't the only one he made feel like that. That was just how much love and care poured out of him. Yet he seemed to think I hung the moon, and I never quite understood why. I hope to one day. His belief in me and affirmation that I was somehow the best of the best made me want to live up to that daily. So every day I will continue to strive to be the version of me that he saw. Whoever your Steve Cohen is in your life, that person that thinks you are infallible, believe them. Believe the wonderful things that they say to you and about you every time that you talk. And if you can't seem to do it for yourself, do it for them. We don't have to understand each other to love each other or ourselves. He gave me more love than I know what to do with, and I'd be remiss if I didn't continue to pass it forward. Steve Cohen's legacy is part of mine now. All there is left to do is go hang the moon. I love you all, and though he is no longer here, I hope you join me in continuing the legacy of love that Steve Cohen has left me with, whatever that looks like to you. I love you, Grandpa. I'll see you on the next pass.
My grandpa was one of the most important people in my life. He gave me the three best things in my life: our relationship, my dad, and my family. Our relationship was like no other. I had never felt a love like I did from my grandpa. Yesterday, my family was talking with Rabbi Foster about how much my grandpa used to call people. He had a list: my uncle, my dad, and if neither of them picked up, Shane. And I'm sure a few of you were on that list too. But I made that list sometimes. He would FaceTime me and tell me how he just wanted to see my face. He was always on the top of my calling list. Whether I was walking to class alone or just bored and wanted to talk to someone, I knew I could always call my grandpa, and the best part was that I knew it would put a smile on his face. He was the first person I wanted to tell my biggest accomplishments to, because making him proud was a different sort of proud to me, a type of proud that was fueled by the unwavering and unconditional love and support that only a grandchild can feel from their grandparent. As I got older, I got more and more close with my grandpa. I would look forward to coming home from college just to see him and hear the words, "There's my favorite girl," and give him the biggest hug. As I would update him on classes and friends, the biggest thing he wanted to know was about boyfriends. He wanted to make sure that whoever was in my life was treating me exactly how I deserved to be treated. He set the bar really high for any boy to come into my life. So high that when I would bring home a boy, my dad would be the warm-up for the grilling that my grandpa would give him. My best memories with my grandpa were shared over meals. No matter what we ended up talking about, the best part was just spending time with him. One time, my dad and I met my grandpa at a bagel shop. He made it a point to tell my dad that he wasn't too hungry. He ordered a bagel and 2 pastries. I was under the impression that since he wasn't too hungry, that we'd be sharing those pastries. He went on to finish half of his bagel and both of those pastries. Although I really wanted to sneak a bite, I was just happy that he was happy. Although he didn't know it, he pushed me to be a better version of myself. While I was at school, I worked hard to accomplish something so that I could come home and tell him, and I would know how proud he was of me. I will forever cherish the time that I had with him, our phone calls, and those big hugs that I know we both looked forward to.
Thank you both, all of you, for really helping to put what this day is all about into perspective. Steve's love. Dear Cheryl, dear Mark and Wendy and Jim and Alyssa, dear Shane, Harley, Asher, and Eva, dear Margie and Gary, dear Keith and Emmy and Dan, Aaron, Shelby, Alicia, Greg, Emily, Gavin, and Brett, those who are with us in person, those who are joining us online, dear family and friends all. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Terumah, which details the building of the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary, and there's a passage, a piece in it, when God is giving Moses the instructions on how to build the tabernacle, that above the ark there are supposed to be two cheruvim, cherubs. And these cherubs are supposed to be fashioned with wings that point up in the sky, and they're supposed to face each other. And the only other time that we see the word cherubs mentioned in the Torah is in the Garden of Eden, where they protect the garden after Adam and Eve are banished. And as you can imagine, the rabbis spend a lot of time trying to figure out what these cheruvim, these cherubs, were all about. After all, we had just received the Ten Commandments, and we were told not to make any graven images. And here God commands us to basically create two graven images. And perhaps the key to understanding the essence of the cheruvim, the cherubs, is in the commandment that they need to face each other. There's a midrash that teaches that when things are good in the world, the cherubs face each other. But when things in the world are out of balance, and the world is not the way it's supposed to be, they face away from each other. And the lesson, of course, is that in order for things to be good in the world, we need to face one another. We need to face our problems. We need to face our shortcomings, our love, and even our own mortality, so that we might live lives of meaning and purpose. Steve Cohen was a man who learned to face many challenges in his life. It wasn't always easy for him. He was not someone who embraced change. He was a creature of habit. And yet he also understood that his striving for stability and consistency didn't always work. And so when the need arose, like the cheruvim, the cherubs over the ark, he turned and faced, eventually, whatever personal, professional, or existential issues that confronted him head on. Steve was not a complicated man. He knew what was important in his life. Family always came first. As you heard, he never forgot a birthday. He worked incredibly hard to serve our Jewish community, and yet he went out of his way to be there for his children, coaching Mark's soccer team, even though at first he didn't know the first thing about soccer. He had to learn. Attending every baseball game, karate match, graduation, celebration. Anytime he could be there for his children, he was. He coached Jim's softball teams. Steve was born here in Denver on March 14th, 1940. His parents, Dorothy and Aaron, raised him and his sisters, Nancy of blessed memory and Margie, in a home that revolved around Feldman Mortuary. Growing up, they were often picked up from school in the Feldman limousine, much to their chagrin and embarrassment. And Margie, you shared that your brother desperately wanted a brother. He didn't know what to do with sisters except to torture you. And especially when you were young, but he loved you deeply, and only he could torture you. If anyone else messed with you, you'd have to answer to Steve. He was a very handsome young man. He was also a star athlete in high school, lettering in golf, baseball, and basketball at East High School. The girls would chase after him, and he wasn't averse to chasing a few himself. There was that time he tried to sneak out of the house at night to meet a girlfriend and crawled on the roof and cut his hand in the gutter in the process, and he had to ring a bell And his mom answered the door, which was not a good thing, and faced her wrath. He graduated from East in 1958 and immediately went into the army and hated it. He served 6 months at Fort Knox, mostly it sounds like on KP, followed by a few years of weekend service. But after his initial first stint in the Army, he enrolled in CU Boulder and became a proud member of the Phi Sig fraternity. Now, Steve had many, many friends from both high school and college. He never lost touch, and many of you are here today, remaining friends throughout life. And during his senior year at the U, he met a young girl from St. Louis named Jill Edlin. The story that Jill just told me was that he was told that there were 2 cute girls in the AE Phi sorority, and they were roommates, so he could only date one of them. He dated Jill. And about a year later, they were married in St. Louis on a very, very hot summer day, August 22nd, 1962. And he came back to Denver, and that was his first stint at working at Feldman Mortuary for his dad. Aaron was a tough boss, and he didn't really like the exacting standards that his father held him to. So after a couple of years, they moved back to St. Louis to work in the family business, artistic furniture. He worked for his father-in-law, who was an even tougher guy to work for than Aaron. And Jill and Steve lived in St. Louis from 1964 to 1980. Mark, you were born in 1965, and then 4 years later in 69, Jim came along. But in 1980, when his father Aaron was having some difficulties, Steve came back to Denver to help his dad, but he also had ulterior motives. He didn't like the furniture business. He liked it less than the funeral business. And he wanted to come home to his friends and to his family. And so he took over at Feldman's. And he built it into a very successful business. And he helped to serve our community in our most difficult times of need. It wasn't an easy move, because even though he was happy to be home, his personal life was suffering. And the tragic loss of his sister Nancy in 1981 was a huge blow to the entire family, and that shock of that tragic loss reverberated through everything in his life. In 1982, Steve and Jill separated, and that was painful. It was hard. And then in 1984, Steve and Cheryl connected, got together, and created a new life based on love, companionship, and shared joy. But the breakup of the family wasn't easy. In 1993, Aaron died, and Steve had yet another loss. And he also realized that the separation from his children that he was experiencing, especially around the holidays, was taking a toll on his soul. So he reached out to Jill and Herb to see if they could repair the damage and once again share the joy of family life. And they both decided, with some pushing from Herb and Cheryl, to put animosity aside and to create a united family. And over the years, Jill and Herb and Steve and Cheryl grew closer together, and that truly was one of the greatest blessings of his life. Cheryl, you and Steve had an incredible bond. You were married in November of 1995, and you shared a love of travel, fine wine, and of course, dogs, but more of that in just a little bit. And you traveled the world together. Cheryl, as you put it, Steve was more fun out of his zip code than when he was in it. Because running a mortuary was all-consuming. He was always on call and always went above and beyond to serve his community, as he bequeathed to his son Jim as well. The minute they left Denver, you could see the tension and the stress just melt away. They loved going to France, traveling, drinking wine, and those deep conversations you had about life and history. He wasn't a deep conversationalist, but somehow when he got out of Denver and you and he were able to explore and celebrate the depth of life and diversity in history, he was a changed man. To Italy, traveling to Israel with Rabbi Foster and Joyce, their dear, dear friends. Of course, Mexico, going to Cabo. Cheryl, you love to sit in the cabana with a book. He worshiped the sun. You hiked, you snowshoed everywhere with the dogs. He even went fishing with Cheryl's family in Montana, and Steve was not a natural fisherman. Actually, he wasn't a fisherman at all, but he loved being with your family, and they loved being with him. And the dogs, huge part of his life. Over 11 dogs over the years. He would come home, get out of his suit, put on his jeans, and play with the dogs, and they calmed him down. There was always a pack in the house. Cheryl, you were the alpha, of course, but there was always a pack of dogs in the house. Cheryl, you shared my marriage, brought me the family of my dreams. And it's clear that you gave the family so much as well. Steve gave you so much joy and love and laughter. And today you grieve. You've lost a true soulmate. And we grieve with you. As a father, Steve had different relationships with both of his boys. Mark, you were the firstborn. And you pushed buttons and boundaries. Even the sports that you chose to participate, soccer and karate, were foreign to your dad, and yet he did everything he could to participate you, from coaching your soccer teams, even to telling your karate teacher that if you didn't finish each lesson, he would do it, because God forbid you shouldn't, he paid for them. They might as well get some use. Steve had strong ideas about what his sons should and shouldn't do, and his vision of life was predetermined. Mark, growing up and as a young man, you pushed back and you often clashed. But later on, you and your dad connected on a very different, sacred level. And for the past 20 years, you spoke every day, not just to show your love, because you became more than father and son. As you shared, he became your best friend. And what an incredible gift you gave to each other. Jim is the youngest. There was a 4-year difference between you and Mark. You and your dad have a different relationship. He was both your coach and your mentor, not just in business, but in life. He gave you his work ethic. He taught you how to work hard, whether it was mowing the lawn for 4 hours on an afternoon, or when you started in the funeral business in 1994. It wasn't always easy. You were the little kid, and you had 2 very, very imposing figures to follow with your father and your grandfather. You had to forge your own identity, kind of like what your dad had to do when he took over. Change was not easy for Steve. He had definite ideas about the way things should be. And when you started to assert your vision on the mortuary, it wasn't easy for him. And yet, to his credit, he stood back. He allowed you to do it. He gave you the chance to succeed. And when you did, he was so proud of you. Wendy and Alyssa, he loved you both. He embraced you as part of the family from the very start, and you in turn loved him as well. And we've heard such beautiful, beautiful tributes from Eva and Shane, representing all of the grandchildren, Asher, Shane, Eva, and Harley, and the absolute unconditional joy and love that he showered on all of you. He was so proud of each of you, and he celebrated your accomplishments and was always there for you with advice and encouragement. He had a special relationship with his brother-in-law, Gary and loved him deeply. And he adored his nieces and his nephews and was there for every simcha and every family occasion, basking in the joy of family togetherness. And as I mentioned earlier, Steve had so many lifelong friends from high school, college, business, and so many different areas of his life. He was a caring friend and always wanted to celebrate joys and bring comfort in times of trouble. We know that towards the end of his life, he faced physical challenges. I remember how just a few years ago he was so sick and we all thought it was it. But he was stubborn. He fought and he pulled through. He had more life to live and more love to give. And he died suddenly, without warning, but without pain as well. And even in our grief, we can give thanks for that. And as I think about Steve Cohen and his legacy of caring and commitment, love of family and community and personal growth, I keep coming back to the image of those two cherubs facing each other. Our tradition teaches that the symbolism and the image of these two divine beings looking into each other's eyes is a symbol of who we need to be, to become, to grow, to evolve. And the act of looking for holiness helps all of us to see God's presence in the world. And I am thankful that he learned the sometimes difficult but vital lesson of the importance of facing fears, of pain, of challenge, of growth, of joy and introspection that allowed him and in the process all of us to see by his example and through his friendship and love of what a good life should be. And so to all the members of Steve's family, and for all the years that he was there for our community, today we are here for you. We send you love, caring, support, and condolences. Zichrono levracha. May the memory of Stephen Cohen, Shimshon ben Aharon Dvorah, be for an eternal blessing. And let us say amen. And now I want to call on Steve's dear friend, Rabbi Stephen Foster, to share some words.
I put those down, is that all right? Between you telling me what to do and Jimmy telling me what to do, I'm going to finish right now. Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, our God and God of all generations, thou who governest all things with infinite wisdom and mercy, and who guidest the destinies of all of humankind. As a parent have you loved us and showered your blessings upon us. Therefore we shall not murmur even when sorrow befalls us. But with humility and unfaltering trust we shall accept your decrees. In joy and in sorrow alike we praise your goodness and acknowledge your justice. We remember that we are but strangers upon earth. Like a shadow our life flees away. Help us, O God, so to walk in your sight, that when the few years of our earthly pilgrimage are ended, we may be ready to meet our end with tranquil mind. To thee we look for comfort and strength. When one of our beloved is taken from us and a link is broken in the chain of love which binds us together. Though we walk in the valley of the shadow of death, we shall fear no evil, for you are with us. Praised, O eternal our God, in all your dispensations, and sanctified be your name, now and forevermore. Let us all say together, amen. Dear family, And also the family of Feldmans, because you are all here and you are equally involved in this process. And Jim, just now you told me, what time do we have to be at the cemetery? 1:45. Well, we'll be all right. Well, maybe we'll get there half an hour late. I just want you to be a mourner now for just a few minutes, just as you have been, because this is a difficult time for you, for your family, for all of us who knew and cared about and loved Steve Cohen. It's always hard to lose those that we love. I don't care what the circumstances are. It's always hard. Someone's place at the family table will now be empty. Even though just a few hours before he died, you were all together. And you enjoyed that time that you shared together. Even the blended family was together. And that's what makes sudden death so difficult. You didn't have a chance to say goodbye, to tell him one last time how much you cared about him, just as he tried to share that with you. And with all of us. I mean, when I think about, he did remember everything. You know, I don't know how many of, while we're here, he had a calendar. First thing he would do in the morning was call to wish everybody happy birthday, the people that were involved in his life. And many of us got phone calls from Steve on a regular basis because he always wanted to be a part of everyone's life. I suppose one of the, not joys of this moment, but one of the satisfying things is that Steve Cohen lived his life to the very end. Yes, it was a sudden death. And yes, as Rabbi Black said so beautifully, he did not suffer. So in some ways, that suffering has been shifted to you as family. But for him, even though he had his moments over the years, and I know it was a kvetcha, this shoulder and that shoulder, and the left knee and the right knee and the left hip and the right hip. I used to play golf with him. And no matter how bad his bones were, he always beat me. Because he was a good golfer. Thursdays at 1 o'clock, that's what we would play. Every week. And it was a joy. So it's always hard not to be able to say goodbye. And to say for those things that perhaps we didn't do, for those that we love that are gone, that we should have done, we didn't have a chance to say that. And yet, he didn't have that suffering. Not that suffering that he understood because he'd been with people so often. And so you as a family are grateful that it was not a prolonged death. As difficult as it is for you. I'm always think about moments like this. I think about the great philosopher Kierkegaard, even though he wasn't Jewish. He said, life must be lived forward, but can only be understood backward. Can only understand a person's life by seeing the totality of that life and trying to understand what life meant to that person and to us. For Steve, I think that's absolutely true. And yesterday when I met with the family, and you didn't listen to me, by the way. You're making this difficult moment for me. Because I said to you, anything you said to me, you are not supposed to share with Rabbi Black. I mean, I know he does a wonderful, wonderful job. And then, as I told you yesterday, that's why I just used notes, so I could just throw them away after after Joe has already said everything that had to be said. But yesterday, we looked back at his life. That's what you were doing. It wasn't just the memories. It was looking at a human being. His joys, his sorrows, his strengths, and his weaknesses. And like all of us, he had them all. And he understood some of them, not all of them, but he understood some of them. So yesterday, when I started with you, and I'm going to start with this, I told you that I was thinking about him in a very personal way and very real way for me. I was trying to understand who Steve was. And I think in some ways, your midrash about the cherubim is absolutely correct. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples why. Steve was not a person of conflict with other people. That isn't what he was. But I believe he was a person who had inner conflict between doing the right thing, whatever it was, and I'm going to give you a couple examples, and making sure he didn't hurt anybody, especially family. Let me give you a couple of examples. At your wedding, I know I said it was doves. I should have remembered that it was butterflies. But you don't know the following. He was always, and came to me. He said, I don't know if this is the right thing to do. I know that's what my kids want, but I'm asking you, is it okay if at the end of that service they let butterflies loose? It was a conflict for him because he didn't want to do something or be perceived as doing something that wasn't correct. And at the same time, knowing that that's what you guys wanted, he didn't want to do anything that would upset you. And I think that's partially how he tried to live his life. You guys were the most important, the people who are here. You were always most important to him. You know that. But it wasn't just because he cared about you and you cared about him. He wanted to make sure that the decisions that he was a part of were okay, even if they weren't. Because that's the kind of person he was. I think the biggest conflict for him was when you guys moved to Denver. I think it was. You know, Steve had a tremendous relationship with his parents. He really did. When they were alive and when they were losing grip, as Aaron did and then Dorothy, and they were such wonderful people. He always cared about them. And he was devoted to them. Part of him wanted to, yes, of course, part of him wanted to come back to Denver. I understand that. But also part of him did not want to hurt anybody else, especially people in St. Louis. He wanted to do things that he knew his parents wanted. Yet he also knew that he did not want to hurt anybody else. And I believe that's what the conflicts were for him. They were internal. He lived with that. Over these years, you know, he knew he had to move forward, whatever it was. But he also understood that he had to look backward over the things that he did and wanted. Life is complex for all of us. But it was complex for Steve, and he understood that. I think I knew him pretty well. He was my golf buddy, my travel buddy. In some ways, and I'm not going to talk about this, but in some ways, I was his confidant. In many ways. I know there are others here who feel the same way. But we talked about a lot of issues over the years and the concerns that he had. Wanting to make sure that whatever it is that he did be acceptable to the people that he loved the most. Even if he didn't always do it right. Because that's who he was. He wanted to make sure that relationship or those relationships were a part of his life. Devotion was a key word in his life. That's who he was as a person. And it wasn't just to be devoted to that mortuary because his father and his grandfather were in the business. It's because he did recognize, especially as time progressed, how important his role would be in the community. And because of that, he was also very generous in his community. I don't know that there's ever and today too, Jim, you do the same thing. I don't know if there's ever a time that there's a community function and there's some kind of request to be a part of and to recognize. Feldman's is always there. And he was always there and always present. He was always there to help families who needed him. Because he cared. He deeply cared. It wasn't just a business for him. He grew to understand that he could be helpful to others. I'm trying to read my notes. Not so easy. These last few years have been difficult for him physically. And yet, as the family seemed to understand almost instinctively, these last few years also softened him, at least the hard sides. Most of it was soft. But, like all of us, we have our edges. But even in the last few years, even those edges began to soften. He began to value those relationships even more. Yes, as Rabbi Black has beautifully said, he cared about consistency. He cared about making sure that you as a family understood there is a way of doing things. And he saw it himself. He was authentic. He was all out front. He understood better than any politician what the word transparency is about. Because he was transparent. Even in his critiques, he was transparent. I do have to disagree with you about one thing. Is that all right? When Jim took over the business, listen, I've been with this family now for almost 53 years. When Jim took over the business, Steve did not step by and not say anything. That isn't his way. If he disagreed, he would tell you. He didn't change those things, but he would tell you because he wanted to be transparent. And that's who he was. He was unfiltered at many times, but he wanted that conversation. He wanted that relationship. He wanted to give respect. This is going to sound strange to most of you, and I've said this so many times with other people. I was never Steve to him. I think the reason is because I spell my name correctly and he did not. But I was never Steve to him. I was always Rabbi. Just like the doctors were always doctors, and the elders in his family were also Mr. and Mrs. That's who he was. And I swear he never called me by my first name. He would say, "Dummy, you missed that putt and it was only 2 feet." But he never called me by my first name. He worked hard, and he made a difference. And he made a difference not just for this family. He made a difference for all of us who were a part of his life. And whether it was the people in the mortuary who worked so hard for him, whether it was his many friends, many of whom unfortunately have gone this same path in recent years, and we understand that, or whether it was his family, his purpose was to be close. So many ways. In some ways, I think he succeeded in that joy. And so to you, his family. Jill, for you and Herb, and in a moment, also for Cheryl. You guys did create something that was unique and different. And your kids understand it. And I think they appreciated it. No matter what it was, you decided at some point that you should have a united front and be together. And you were, even the night before he died. What a wonderful gift for this family. And as I said that to you yesterday, you said, yeah, it was because of Herb and Cheryl. I understand that. They're part of that, of course. But you are a part of that, you and Steve. You should be grateful for that gift that you have given together with him to the rest of the family. To you, Margie, your family. I've known you guys a long time. Your family's here. That's what's so terribly important. To them, they had the relationship with him as well. So we can only hope and pray that you will take all of those memories that you have, all those unique ways in which you and your family were family, and then you will keep them precious. You as grandchildren, you're the most important people here in some ways, because you have to carry on that legacy. You all have to learn to mourn. You all have to remember. You all have to wonder about what happens when we die. But the truth is, to emulate that legacy, that is the responsibility of these grandchildren. And we pray in days to come and years to come, great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. They should always know who he was, how he made a difference in our community. To you, his sons, wonderful women that you brought into this family's life, were his kids. And you know he loved you very much. And you know you talk to him every day. You know that. And it wasn't just out of an obligation. It was out of love. And Cheryl, we've traveled together lots over the years. Always been a joy. That doesn't mean that you and Steve didn't disagree from time to time. I'm glad you did, because your bickering was like our bickering. So it made ours go away. We understand all that. That's what it means to love another human being. You and Steve had a deep love. You cared about each other. And you were always with him. Always supported him in whatever he did. He was grateful to have you in his life. Yeah, of course he wanted you to change certain things. That's the way life is. He loved who you were. We always loved watching you. We hope and we pray that for all of you, you will find strength and courage in who he was and how he lived his life. If Steve were here right now, he would ask me to read the following poem, because he loved this poem. Poet wrote, "When I die, if you need to weep, cry for someone walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around others and give them what you need to give me. You can love me most by sharing your joys and multiplying your good deeds. You can love me most by letting me live in your eyes and not in your mind. And when you say Kaddish for me, remember what our tradition teaches. Love doesn't die. People do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away." I think that's what Steve would ask of all of us. Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, yehi shem Adonai mevarach, mi'ata v'ad olam. God has given. God has taken away. Praise be the name of God now and forevermore. Let us all say together.
And so we pray that the memory of Stephen J. Cohen might endure among us as a blessing. In your own time, O God, when we too are called to enter eternity, may we leave this life secure in the faith that in your light we shall see light. In life and in death, we cannot go where you are not, and where you are, hope endures. And so, sustained by this assurance, we invoke your name, Almighty God, as we rise now as we are able for the El Maleh Rachamim.
El Maleh Rachamim. שוכן במרומים, המסי מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה. עם קדושים ודורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת שמשון בן אהרון ודבורה שהלך לעולמו. בוא הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Stephen J. Cohen, Shimshon ben Aaron Udvora, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge forever in the shadow of your wings. Let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. My friends, the family has asked that I announce Shiva and condolence call information. Today, from here we're going to process, this is what Jim usually says, so I'm going to say it now, to Emmanuel Cemetery. Will there be a procession? There will be a procession, so I'm going to do this just like you do, Jim. So we ask that if you are going to the cemetery, that you gather. We'll be setting the procession outside the entrance to Temple Emmanuel on Grape Street. If you are not going to be in the procession, we ask that you leave the parking lot and make sure that the procession can proceed smoothly. Following burial at Emmanuel Cemetery, the family will greet mourners and people with condolences at the home of Jim and Alicia's gracious neighbor at 1275 South Fillmore Street. That's 1275 South Fillmore Street. There will be a Shiva service tonight at that address at 7 o'clock p.m. Is the minyan at 5:30 p.m.? The minyan's going to be at 5:30 p.m. Tomorrow, from 12 to 3 and then 7 to 8:30 p.m. With a minyan at 7 at the home of Cheryl, 9444 Poundstone Place in Greenwood Village. At this time, we ask that the pallbearers please come forward. Okay.
I shall dwell in the house of